audience, folks? Or were you here?
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't you just mention your name and what department you're in, say?
Andrea, undergrad, public policy and history.
Okay, great.
I'm Shelby. You can call me Sunny, and I'm in the MAPS program, sociology track.
Okay. For people in the MAPS or anybody doing a BA or MA, is there a topic you have in mind?
Yes. I want to do like social media protest.
Social media protest. That's right next to where we are right now. Tell us just a little more.
Yeah. I want to focus like the Chinese feminism movement and
The Chinese which movement?
feminism.
Feminism. Okay.
And how people's opinion like about the feminism go more like become more sure about their own opinion on the social media and form the movement on social media.
Okay. Well, we have an expert here.
Okay, I'm Yu Chao. Also, I'm a student in sociology and I'm interested in historical sociology in particular. And I'm currently studying post-colonial development in Northeast China.
Okay, great.
My name is Ryan, undergrad, studying political science and sociology, currently doing work on a thesis for political corruption in my hometown, actually.
What's your hometown?
Laredo, Texas. It's on the border.
Laredo, Texas. Okay, great. You want to tell us a little more about how you conceive and measure corruption? It's often a hard one.
Yeah, we had a mayor that relied a lot on patronage, so he used a throne system back in the 60s to be mayor for like 30 years. So he paid off a lot of, like extra mail funds and everything. So really want to study that era as well.
Okay. How will you identify corruption, I guess?
I was thinking of going to the archives in my local library and looking at like actual documentation of the city records when it comes to expenses that were used at its time.
Will the records be true?
I think so. Yeah.
There's one of the best books on the history of Chicago is by Edward Banfield called Political Influence, and he has a quote basically of a Chicago City Council meeting where the committee was working on their budget, and they worked for an hour or something like that. An hour later, the mayor came in, and he said to the person who was taking the minutes, said, "Throw that out. What really happened was the following. The committee recommended this, the mayor approved that, and it was implemented, and that was the end of the issue." It's totally different than what had been done by the committee in the hour before that. So remember things like that. Yeah, I did a PhD and spent 5 years working on archives, and they can be all over the place. If you get 2 or 3 sources and check them against each other, recommending, for instance, or remembering that anything can be, especially about things which are illegal or things which are not meant to be known beyond a certain group. It can happen a lot. Okay, and that's for everybody, but and for all kinds of documents, including on social media, maybe even on feminism in China. Okay, but Fritz?
I am Felix. I'm an undergrad. I'm currently in sociology and linguistics. Okay, my topic has been just thrown away by myself. But the new topic, which is for my next year, is how the education of language plays out, in a sense. But I haven't really identified a particular locale that I want to study this yet, so that's still in the works. But that is basically the idea.
Okay.
My name is Gabriel. I'm a political science major, undergrad student.
Special interests?
You're like international relations.
Any particular topic?
I mean, like this quarter and last quarter, I'm taking 2 courses that's sort of related to like globalization and labor, and then also what I'm taking now is called the political economy of technological change. So sort of looking at how globalization affects labor movements, but also like the diffusion of technology.
Okay, great. George?
My name is Jorge, and I'm political science, international relations, conflict, and I research in militias in the US and also abroad.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm an undergrad. I'm studying global studies and economics.
Yeah. Are these, is this on me the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you stand up? Let's move it around more
Yeah.
and just
Yeah,
show it
okay.
around a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Just tell us a few more sentences, please.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of interested in economic growth within developing countries. I feel like I've been kind of focusing on that within my classwork and possible interest within writing a thesis. Yeah.
Okay, great. Would you want to mention anything about your own topic, especially as we have one student who should talk to you
Okay, so
actively?
I'm Shiran. I'm the TA of this class, and I'm a sociology PhD student, and my research focus is social movement and political sociology, and my dissertation topic is about the Me Too movement in China around 2018.
Okay.
Before that, I studied student movement in post-Tiananmen Beijing.
Okay. Well, the last workshop I taught was 2 years ago, and we had about 15 students, and around 12 were Chinese, and 3 of them were working on women and feminism in different ways. So I should say women in different ways. One of which could be more feminist, and one was very closer to be highly organized. The others were very different. So an interesting point for international comparison is if you look at specific movements and results and resources that are used in different ways, communication. Some of the social media. In my other class yesterday, we had a long discussion of this by a woman who was the president, one of 3 presidents of the youth movement in Shanghai. And one thing they did was to train volunteers. Volunteers, and they had many different ways. Well, these 3 didn't do all the training, but they would. And one set of activities was especially popular about the environment and where and how people could go to flooding regions of China and try to help out as volunteers, but there were thousands of them. So try to coordinate, and then where and why and then after that drastically increased. And this happened not only in China, but also in Korea and Japan, roughly, with a tsunami and so forth. The numbers that is, before this, there were almost no members of many social organizations, which might be called NGOs, or including many things on social media in these 3 countries. Basically, about 15 years ago, they took off, and so there was a huge jump, especially after these floods, and it just does not seem to have gone down. So the activism via social media and via particular issue, such as Me Too or floods, could be heightened by, and where and how much this is supervised more actively by the Chinese government is very complicated. So where and how that is, international comparisons are great and valuable to see what's present and what's not present, and then if you can't get variations across countries, maybe across issues, and in the case of China. But my simple point is the government is very, you can't, in many of these social media in the world, people can just connect, participate, leave, use an assumed name, and nobody knows who they were, where they came from, where they left for, and so forth. In China, these information, before they're trained, what we learn today, is a lot of information the government collects and saves that and uses that in conjunction with volunteering. But that goes into your general information, which can also be accessed by proper authorities in ways that then there are official links between a movement like an environmental movement, which has a sort of monitoring, supervisory, adhering to the rules kind of connection between the environmental or local organization, say in one city, and the other organizations and national media which connect these. And so in a few of the feminist movements, or at least especially one that was more conflictual, you had to be on a waiting list for 2 years before you could join the social movement. So you can't just come in and leave out and leave and have nobody paying any attention. So in that sense, the meaning of where and how people protest and the kinds of controls and so forth are sensitive. Okay, maybe I'll leave it as that. The Monday we went through the first readings 1, 2, 3, 4, and the main starred readings here are this Cities and Entertainment Machine, the Lipset book, Political Man, Ken Tuckville Karaoke, and Christopher Bale, Terrified, How Anti-Muslim Fringe Organizations Became Mainstream. Let me just add one quick comment to link it right with what I've just said about feminism in China and other things like the social movements. Has anybody looked at the Bale book, Terrified? Okay. The methodological point I want to make about it is that he's a very smart guy who uses multiple methods. He's trying to understand how the president of the U.S. and the top leaders in the Congress moved in a strong direction that we could call, or he terms as basically anti-Muslim, or at least being very cautious and often critical about Muslims in about a 5 to 10 year period. I mean, how can you have such a change as this? In the 9/11 Twin Towers were destroyed. President Bush then said, we want to be very careful to remember that most Muslims are law-abiding American citizens or residents here, and we want to have them feel welcome and participatory and recognized like all other citizens, and we want to be very careful, especially after this tragic event of 9/11. Okay. 5 years later, the presidents didn't say that at all. They dropped that kind of leaning forward or leaning toward seeing that kind of thing about Muslims. There was a much more distinctly, and so so it started with a small group in one city that said we're gonna fight Muslims. Damn, everywhere in a very active way. And so they started, but they started in a very small group, and then it started to meetings, have personal in-person meetings. They started to connect with social media. Then that got flipped up, and it got more and more paid attention. Then they would start to send petitions to political leaders and send that is what I'm giving. Say now the point I want to make is there are about 5 or 6 interrelated kinds of big, we can call issue areas, or at least organizations and places that may have had rather different names, structures, participants, and where and how their dynamics worked were quite different. And he then, as the analyst, used a different method altogether. So he did participant observation about one of them. A second one, he did a questionnaire survey. A third, he used a content analysis of the social media. And in that way, he could trace how these things happen. Whereas if you do what many of the journal articles do, which is have one data set, one city, one organization like feminism or corruption, and not have anything else, you may lose things which are not there if you used it. For instance, so if you say, I'm going to go to the archives for corruption, maybe there's something in the newspapers. If you then consider maybe if some people are still alive or their children or grandchildren, can you interview people about the people who were key participants, like the mayor there for 30 years is clearly a big, important person. Related might be, what is there about corruption in other cities in Texas or in other cities in the US as big outliers, very strong, important cases, and the highest number in terms of corruption measured by the US Justice Department, and the number of violations in terms of people going to jail or people being indicted, being reviewed by the courts for corruption. Louisiana is the #1 state in the country, and #2 is Illinois. Okay, so we got lots of corruption all across the state. We have lots of activities, and for a while, the key person was the former dean of the law school and president of the University of Chicago, Edward Levy, because he was U.S. Attorney General, and he was really going to try to make Illinois and Chicago less corrupt. And so he did a lot of things, and he moved in federal, that is, as the head federal official, he moved in lots of federal officials, sent them into Illinois, and really, and lots more people were indicted, lots more people went to jail, lots new of institutions were, so that is, you can have and one individual, you can have higher different lower levels of government, you can have, okay, so all of these may be interpenetrating each other. Now, in one BA, for sure, in one MA, one PhD, one book, it's very hard to get more than a couple of these things given your time. But I'm pointing to this book it's called Terrified. Take a look and see how creatively it was done. But he also did it in it's basically his PhD. So you can do more than, and so I'm suggesting, I would say, I'd be more comfortable trying to do something like that than only use one survey research study, for example, in the sense that you'd leave out so much else, which he tells in this story here. Okay, so it's a somewhat methodological point, but it's a point about multi-causality, but it adds to those 2 points which we've made strongly before. Multi-causality, multiple methods, but the third is different whole areas which seem to be different domains, different subject matters almost, are maybe more interconnected if you're trying to say, how are you fighting corruption in Illinois or in Laredo, Texas? These things, at least ask some other people, ask some people, how did this, so I'll give you one example in Texas, not that far from Laredo. there was one gas station, and they had a motel right next to the gas station. So I was staying there, and I said, "Tell me about local politics here." I said, "That's me. What's your position?" "I'm the mayor." "Oh, really? How do you deal with others?" "Well, I'm also chairman of the. I'm head of the police, and my wife does all the paperwork." Okay, and so so then he pulled out his gun, fired. He shot at something. Said, we take care of things that need it. Okay, then 2 or 3 days later, I was staying in the motel. About a mile further down the road, on the other side of the street, there was a Mexican guy, Mexican or Mexican American, and he had Mexican Americans who were just crossing over the border from Mexico, and I was there one time at night, late at night. I was climbing in the mountains, really practicing for climbing, and I came back when it was dark. And there was a huge truck. People were getting out of the truck. They were getting into individual cars and driving away. Having been maybe 30, 40 people have been in this truck, and they went off in 30 or 40 cars individually. And so I thought, wow, that's important. Then I kept talking to people a little later, and we found out about 20 miles further along, the police were there, and they'd arrest all 30 of those. They caught all the cars, all the people. And then what they would do was the guy in the first gas station, he would buy those cars from the police because they'd been seized from the other police station, from the other gas station. Okay. So, is this corruption? Would you learn this from one data source? Is it multi-causality? Okay, so I wouldn't have known this. That is and that is, I've had many students and many things where I spent my whole adult life basically in Chicago, living in Bronzeville, and I've had many aldermen come to class, and for instance, and more in the past when it's more colorful. So one alderman came in and said, "I'm the alderman. I have a jacket with 2 pockets. I have over here the people who elected me. I then go down to the office of patronage," use that term, in City Hall. I found out, where are the jobs? I don't want the big jobs, doctors and lawyers. We want the jobs that my folks could use. And I get a list of those. My job is to match those up as alderman. Okay, is that what it says in the law? Okay. So, and this was in a classroom, recorded. He knew it was all being recorded. He didn't try to hide anything. So in that sense, the confidence that this was the right way to do things, this is Chicago, we do it that way. Edward Burke, who was tried about a year ago, indicted. I'm still not sure if he's in jail now or what is. Or I think he's trying to have another trial and another sentencing. But he in the same way talked completely openly about himself and what he did and how he. And so, for instance, one person who they had in court ready to testify against him, saying he wanted to have a substantial bribe paid to him, and he, the alderman, said, "Well, did you go by the cash register?" Okay, no. Okay, and that's why he didn't get the contract. Okay, so some people in Chicago, these things are not even taboo. They may be so openly discussed that, okay, whereas other things, people just don't tell you anything at all. Okay, so the I often would meet and go down, with, say, with a PhD student, and we'd go downtown. We'd meet in a bar with one of the aldermen, and they would, I mean, they wouldn't want anybody there except us talking quietly. And he would, and if he would then find the PhD student and the topic and the way they might work on it together, and how I could try to link with him in some way, he then might accept the helping the student. But many times they would not. So I'm saying, and at that point, the city council had 0 records, basically, let me reframe it. One of the first things that Harold Washington did when he was elected mayor, and he ran on fighting corruption, fighting patronage was one of his biggest programs, and then Daily 2 did the same. They changed the rules, but the first thing that Harold Washington did was to say the Freedom of Information Act will now be implemented in Chicago, which means that anybody, any citizen, any lawyer, any newspaper reporter can come to the city of Chicago and request the documents. But before that, nobody could get anything, basically. So in mentioning Laredo, I'm interested in what you can get, and mentioning this for others, for others to be sensitive to where and how much people's results are substantially different in these terms. I could tell you for an hour about the same thing, for instance, in Japan. Just I'm totally, two totally contradictory MA theses. Each did use different sources, each use different methods, and one basically was saying the Japanese are using engineering criteria to be more efficient and do higher quality work than people do in other countries. The second one said this is all about patronage and jobs and payoffs, and the officially named stuff about engineering staff is cover over. Okay.
Question.
Yep.
What they do in IR, they interview people in that sense.
Okay.
So they have the archives, and then they go and interview people like this. It was, like a genocide or whatever. They go family by family asking them, and they put the puzzle together. Is that something that you can approach?
Well, but who do you ask, and what do you ask them? And if they know and you know that it's illegal in many political systems or with many people, they just no, I don't know, or they'll say things which they know which are maybe partially true, but they'll leave out the sophisticated people, and Chicago and some small towns in Texas are very sophisticated. They're doing this for years. These people are, they're selling cars, they're buying cars. One in each car, and each of these persons is, paid thousands of dollars to get taken illegally across the border, et cetera, et cetera. And they're hundreds of thousands of people doing this stuff in different ways. Many different ways. I won't. How far to generalize what is a big. Okay, that's something we've really been adding with our scenes work. A major part of any theory and interpretation is to what and how far is what you're analyzing applied or contextualized. What is the context that holds? And so if you have, say, experts on what, about what, which, one partial solution, if you're unsure and unclear, is to try to present the reader with two conflicting interpretations, which are presented explicitly by two different experts. Then we can try to see, what are your positions, and there's stuff about this in the press all the time about the for instance, the son of Biden right now, and how much as President Biden was corrupted, and there's a long report which basically says, well, maybe he was just an elderly man and he forgot. On the other hand, if he forgets so much, he's not fit to be president. So it's, and this is, all this is coming out, in the middle of a political campaign where Trump and Biden are fighting against each other and using all kinds of, okay. So in that sense, the U.S. is by no means a pristine, truthful, clean, perfect example. We've got corruption, we've got murders, we've got bribes, we've got all kinds of things. But the question is where and how much and why, and so forth. And that's okay. So if you the bottom line of that is try to have the specification that you, and this usually has to be the analyst, can add the context about where and why there may be conflicts of interpretation, and especially on things like Me Too. People misinterpret and report different things. Okay, there's a book on women and Me Too kinds of issues by a philosopher professor here, and her one sentence point is there are all kinds of people who are misstating and overstating and not reporting things properly, and so she starts with that, but then she tries to go on and say we should change the systems, different systems involved in this. Okay, cities and entertainment machine. So there's this paperback version, and there's a hardback version, which has about 4 more chapters, which we dropped out to make it more. I can't remember. I don't think it's on Canvas. I guess because we got more than 100 pages, and so. Anybody have a copy handy in here? No. Okay, I'm the only one. All right. I'll try not then to do things which depend on seeing a picture, but I want to give you a couple, just some. I don't have one single point. I want to. What this does is basically ask if we are in a situation most dramatically where China is. China is drastically and rapidly changing. Right now we're changing, maybe totally away from corruption. We're changing the topic. How does the economy work in China? And similar in many ways to Japan and Korea. They were a production export economy from roughly the late 40s until the early 20 and into the 21st century, and it's still in part going on. That is, they're exporting Apple iPhones, cars, electronic things, shirts, millions of things are exported, and lots of money comes back. They use some of that money to buy U.S. Treasury bills, so the U.S. government can pay for its programs, which it couldn't continue by using, basically funding it as a deficit. That is, that there's a deficit in the amount of money which the U.S. government takes in, and it pays out, and that's called a deficit. It's a difference. If those Treasury bills weren't sold to the Chinese, who've got lots of money, the U.S. could not send welfare services to American citizens getting welfare services, or get your tax returns done, or pay the U.S. military, or research and development fund, grants for, or scholarships and loans for students. Okay. China, also Korea and Japan in the last couple of decades, have moved partially away from the organization that really structured this. They wrote the most books, the most reports, the most detail about how to do this was called MITI, and MITI, and that was the name for decades. sometime, not too long ago, they changed the name to include Cool Japan. What was that? They totally shifted away from production and export to consumption within Japan as well as consumption internationally. So they saw that this was happening around the world, especially in Europe and the US, and they said, how can we have people who are not just buying a television or a Japanese car, how can they consume in ways that may be more friendly to Japan? And so they study, I think, 5 or 6 main countries. I think they went ranging from Indonesia to China to France to the U.S. and said, how can we show these people in these faraway countries that Japan is cool and exciting, and you should participate somehow. And so they studied it in detail, spent millions of dollars to get this kind of information. And they did very different things in each of those countries. So in Paris, they bought or rented a couple of city blocks, and they built a whole little section of Japan right in the middle of Paris. So they had cafes, bakeries, restaurants, clothing stores, but as if you were in Tokyo, but done with enough appeal to be more interesting than the French in their own headquarters of design and of cafes and of restaurants and bakeries. So, and I would say, I myself have been to some top, I just went into a cafe and into a bakery in Tokyo, and they have French pastry better than you can find anywhere in Paris. Unbelievable. So the Japanese have done that, okay. And basically they did the same thing. In the U.S., I think it was in the U.S., they didn't do that at all. Instead they have parts of social media and films and something like that that would try to highlight something about Japan being more cool. But so the point is, this planning organization saying, export, bring the money back, is what China, Japan, and so China is special. So basically, first of all, we need to recognize. Well, let me add then. Do the economists, political scientists, sociologists in the U.S. and Europe, do they study consumption? That's the question I asked. The answer is no. Most of the work in the West also is about production. It's about jobs. It's about Marx. And so the version of Marx, the economic base is the substructure and the superstructure. It's just like smoke. It's adapting. It changes with whatever. It's changed by. It's not one totally simply deterministic, but it has a big impact. And it's not. I mean, I choose Marxist first, but the simple term in business magazines is often the same way, that it's a natural interest, or the normal people want money and don't talk about happiness or marital satisfaction or something else, or happy children, other kinds of things. As we have more focus on welfare states, as the concept of citizenship, early 19th century citizenship meant almost nothing in terms of lots of governmental rights or services. You get to the later 20th century and into the 21st, and we've got lots about happiness, satisfaction, what do I want, what do you want, and so forth. Gets defined more and more and more broadly, and so one famous case was in Honolulu, where one woman was walking with her dog, and a car hit her dog and killed the car killed her dog, and so she said, I have $X million worth of grief that I now have in my head because of this. And so it was a famous case, because how could someone say positively or negatively, or not beyond that, how much money was that amount of grief worth? And but the reason it's a famous case was it's so hard so economists, such as from the 1930s onward, have been fighting over how can we measure the welfare state and welfare services. And so from Keynes, so Keynes basically was saying, let's get over the Depression, we'll try to have the government be more active. But then the British initial welfare economists were trying to say, well, yes, government ought to do a lot of this, we ought to try to make things better. We ought to make welfare higher for everyone in England. Okay, so Paul Samuelson said, I mentioned on Monday, he went to London, and he had some of the top welfare economists sitting in the first row. I didn't say this on Monday. They're all sitting there, and Samuelson was this young Turk, probably in his 30s, but he was a bit arrogant, and I shouldn't have to say that. And he said basically, people in the first row are wrong. I'll tell you why. So these senior people, are 20, 34 years senior to him. They were top advisors and top economists in England, and he's saying, what you're doing is all wrong. And so, and what he meant, and so, what would he say based on what those of you either saw the video or were here on Monday, in a couple of words? One, two,
You mean
three.
consumption?
3 of you were here. Yeah.
Yeah. He mentioned consumption.
Yeah. Good. How does that? So I'm trying to get to this book, the next book. That is, yeah. So I'm giving you a hint. We're asking questions. Yeah. Why don't you close that about halfway? Yeah, that's great. And about halfway, please. Hello. Halfway open, half closed. Maybe same here. Or if we just leave it half open, half closed, that's good. We don't want you to, or maybe you sit on the other side if you're really freezing right here.
Consumption was running the economy.
Well, the English welfare economists would say, yes, of course, we want to do this, and we want to help the British consumers be more able to consume more comfortably, and we want them to be more satisfied. But how and why did what they say, how did they say how to do it? How did they choose programs? How would they choose amounts? How would they just set budgets? How would you, that is, would you have more, that is, so the English police for many years, for instance, never carry guns. They might have a nightstick. Sorry, go ahead.
A baton?
A baton, whatever.
Yeah.
Other names, but whatever. Where and why should those? That is, if they would carry guns, that would make some people better protected. Other people will say, oh no, the British police should never carry guns. They never did that. So, does that make things better as a welfare government service? How should the schools use discipline within the classrooms, etc.? So let me ask, what did I tell you about Samuelson? That is, we have no reading on Samuelson. I gave you I said 2 things which I sort of qualified. I said
the public good.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about that just for a minute. And why is that important here?
You said use of public goods to buy people.
Well, okay. So let's. What's a public good? Just for so what's a public good? I gave you a little simple definition.
Clean air, for example, is a public good.
Yes, clean air. That's good. War or peace. So if you're living in the Ukraine or Israel right now, that's a pretty big public good surrounding you, which is different than if you're in France or Palo Alto. But beyond that, what's the big, what led Samuelson and then Kenneth Arrow and the major smart economists from for about 20 years to say, we're not going to study politics because it's too complicated and it doesn't work following the rules we're used to following within the discipline of economics. What led him to say that? And I gave you an example of a bus. So we have a bus in London.
Free riders. Free riders?
Free riders, important point. What's a free rider?
It's someone that does not pay for a good but can still glean the benefits of it.
Exactly. So if you slip behind other people who are paying their fee to get into the bus, and you slip in without paying, you are a free rider in the literal sense of riding on the bus for free, because you stole the fee, if you will, in that sense. Okay. So Samuelson basically said, if governments and political big decisions are sometimes affecting, let me go ahead and say this, are doing things which involve public goods, there is a strategic incentive. The strategic incentive is a nice word the economists use for stealing or lying or being corrupt. And there's an incentive to do so. If you're the mayor of Laredo for 30 years, you got lots of incentives. Or in the little town I told you about, you know, he's the mayor, he's the gas station owner, his wife keeps the records and so forth. There's an incentive to do the same thing that Daley would do here, to dictate whatever you want to say for the written record. And so Samuelson and many economists concluded, we're not going to touch this at all. Don't write about politics, because it involves a lot of free riding, but more specifically what they would talk about is strategic incentives or strategic behavior can so easily act in ways that they can't be readily incorporated in the normal supply and demand intersection of two curves, and which would lead to the supply of the market generating the right quantity of services and prices and colors in ways that would satisfy at least the average, you know, the market for shoes. So it's for certain colors of shoes, certain price, and so forth. You can have a different market for higher end shoes and different colors and so forth and so forth. But what I'm getting to here was to say, the economists, the social scientists in the West and in China, Japan, and Korea had minimal theories to deal with consumption. Most of the theories in the social sciences were, and with Marx, were about production. And it could not just be that people want more money. You don't need to impute that everyone wants money, or they want more to be more affluent, or that they're happier. So, for instance, here's a big point. I mentioned talking about Tocqueville, and Tocqueville said, if you have civic activity, you can build trust and legitimacy. And I mentioned the well-known results of the normal measures of trust. Scandinavians, 80%, 90% of people trust the national government, as well as their friends, as well as local people, as well as the police, and so forth. Ask the same identical questions in Argentina, Brazil. It's maybe 8%. The US, Western Europe, maybe around 40%, in the middle. Latin America has the most trusting, but in Brazil, you ask people, how happy are you? And then you ask people in the US, how happy are you? And you go to Scandinavia and ask, how happy are you? And the Brazilians are happier than anybody anywhere else. Is this part of welfare? Should the government try to be making people more happy? Isn't being happy part of welfare? Or is money more important than happiness? Shouldn't happiness be the goal and money be a means? Okay. or is it an and? Okay, so basically what we said, let's review the best theories we've got about consumption in all the social sciences. I say all. I mean, this is economics, political science, sociology, geography, a little bit of anthropology. Okay, so we then said, let's try to distill the best ideas we can find in 5 years, whatever, of writing one book, and then distill these in the sense of writing propositions. So I'll give you just a couple of examples of propositions that we have here, and then we'll talk about a couple of them, but I can't talk to, we have maybe 50 propositions that come from the various social sciences, but some of these are tightly interrelated. They're nice, logically deductive. X leads to Y, Y leads to Z, Z leads to W. You can get nice, tightly related curves and propositions. Others are not. So this is not a highly integrated, coherent single theory, the way that Samuelson wanted to do, and so Samuelson said, "Give up. We can't do it." Let me mention one thing is. What we talk about today is diversity. What's diversity? In Europe, the US, it's the same basic term. It's the political importance or policies related to what? Or that come from I'll read some things on the top of this. Put my reading glasses on. Level of education completed. Respondents African American or not. Occupation. So occupation, age, education, income. So these are measures of aspects are thought about now as diversity. How strong and how important is diversity in the political system in the US or Western Europe, or in feminism in China, or in Laredo? How important are these issues in affecting lots of things that people do? And lots of things that people do, I'm going to read you some examples that come from a source called the DDB. DDB is the largest marketing and advertising company in one of the largest, and they're probably the largest that spend money to make available data that people like me and Robert Putnam can use. So Robert Putnam used this as a major source for his book called Bowling Alone. Okay, so we talked about problems with bowling alone, but we used the same data to try to check, because it's rich data. This is about 80,000 people based on annual surveys of 1,500 people asked again and again and again, year after year after year after year. So you've got overtime changes, so you can say which changed first, having a BA degree or not, getting an income of a certain level, how much do you spend, how much do you save? I mean, these are very valuable data because you can get for people over time as well as big numbers. Okay, and the kinds of questions that were asked, and I have 2 pages of them, but I'll just read you some examples. Rode a bicycle in the last 12 months, went bowling, went camping, gambled in a casino, attended church or other place of worship, went to a classical concert, went clothes shopping, now here's an attitudinal item. Dressing well is an important part of my life. Went to club meeting. The car I drive is a reflection of who I am. Worked in a community project. So several of these participation and activism, these are right out of Putnam kinds of, and this is Putnam. Okay. Now the question for you is, folks, How strong are the relationships between these activities and diversity? If you follow a lot of the rhetoric, these are very strong. Racism is really holding down on terms of having lower income. You can't get good jobs. You can't be treated properly if you have a black face or a non-white face. Okay. You can look at the column which says, we look at the answers from African Americans and what did they say in terms of how they answer the same questions as everybody else. The same thing in terms of people's level of education. How much does education change the answers to these standardized items? So the question is, so I've got, it's a matrix, got the top and going down the side. How strong are the entries in each of these cells? What would you guess?
The one on page 33.
This is yeah, it's on page 33.
Okay.
Yeah, is that on Canvas somewhere?
I think so. There should be like a zip file of the manuscript.
Okay, okay, so maybe page proofs are there in somewhere. Okay, great. Yeah, actually, it may be that this thing is available on either Google or Amazon. They may have free pages. Many books are available. Some maybe not the whole book, but if they have page 33, that's the. But you're going to hear the answer right here in a minute or two. Question is asking you, how strong? Point 8. These are simple correlation coefficients. These are not regressions. These are just one thing. This is one relationship, one variable, being black and shopping, biking. How often were you bicycling in the last year and so forth? Being high in income, elderly, or that is age of any level. How strongly do people's behaviors and reported activities? 0.9, 0.8. That is, a lot of the rhetoric implies if you are black, if you are a woman, if you are elderly, you will be richer, poorer, this or that. The main thing which really hit me looking at this was, wow, these are low. 0.04, 0.01, 0.16. This is a correlation. If you want to ask about how much shared variance is the statistical term, how much do these two variables of being black and also riding a bicycle, how much does being black explain the riding a bicycle and how often you rode a bicycle in the last year? If you square square the term, so if you have 0.1 times 0.1, we got 0.001. We got a very small amount of variance is explained if that's the case. And these things are all, that is, these all show less. The highest ones you see are about 15% of shared variance. Okay. So I then sort of said, this is Clark's, noise proposition. There's a lot of, that is luck, noise, other things. So the economists handle this by talking about ceteris paribus. Other things equal, then long term, and if we have freedom of competition, freedom of entry, perfect information, then the markets work perfectly the way the theory says they should. But if you don't have all those things, those contexts fully specified, then we're not quite sure what it does. And then there's a guy at MIT, I've been saying this for 10 years, and this is one of my propositions, 15%. And I found about a year ago, a top econometrician died and said this is one of his propositions as well. Independently. And is this about economics or about political science? No. This is life. This is biology. This is medicine. This is law. We don't have much more information for anything to explain more than about. Now, big qualification. This is a big N kind of result. And if you only have 50 cases or 6 cases, you can say, well, my theory fits perfectly with my one case. So if you read the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Business Week, and of course, social media, I saw one, and therefore this is the way the world works. All you need is one case, or that is the normal thing you're taught in journalism school. One story, one theme, one first sentence, one paragraph is all you should do. If you have 2 stories, for instance, there's racism in a small town in West Virginia, that's one story. If you want to tell another story, which is the furniture factory closed in the same town in West Virginia, and that was driven by Chinese companies going into the furniture business, and that led to globalization destroying the economy of that town. Okay, so the normal news stories is to have 2 totally different stories. And I'm adding this in this example because I work with a dozen or so, mainly political science students right here, and we worked together on Trump. And we looked at, said, who's voting for Trump? You know, who are the Trump supporters? And how can we interpret them? And one thing we did was to read, because at the beginning there was no social science research. This is all in the press. So we started with the press, and what's the press tell you? 25 different interpretations, totally contradictory, no relationship to each other. And as you then keep going further, it's tricky. Okay, but so that is each group of 2 students who would join in co-authoring, and so we had 7 students that already worked on this. We had 2 more. Said, oh no, they didn't do it right. We're going to do it the right way. So then they spent for 6 months. We'd add 2 more variables, and basically we have a whole bunch of factors which people have identified in the press that we've identified with many different kinds of things. But one question in terms of women and voting for Trump. What proportion of white women in America voted for Donald Trump in the first election when he ran for president in the general election? Anybody want to guess on this?
43%.
Anybody else? That is, he was running against whom? Hillary Clinton. Did she talk about women? They should vote for me because you're a woman? Yes. Would you think that many women should be voting for Hillary Clinton? Not for Donald Trump. All this stuff about sex and rape and so forth, shouldn't this lead to people turning against them? In the first election, I think it was 52% of white American women voted for Donald Trump. Or said these are the post-election surveys. When people come out of the voting booth, you have a journalist there saying, could you please tell me a couple of questions, who you voted for? And so if people say, I voted for Trump proudly, that's an answer. But other people would say, I'm not going to tell you, or they may say, yes, I voted for Hillary, but in fact they may have voted for Trump. Maybe because they were white women. Okay, so maybe it was even higher than 52. Okay, so couple of points. So in terms of these items which are down here on the left, all different kinds of things, contributed to an environmental or conservation organization. We want to study the environment and where we have a big national sample of Americans who supported the environment. Terrific data. What's the theory and how do these fit together? The first simple point is don't look for any one thing. Expect multi-causality, and don't expect to explain all that much from one method or one source or one question, because if you ask the question in different ways, you may get different results. But there's a lot of noise and a lot of luck, a lot of things. If you do a case study of, say, Laredo, keep in mind, Laredo may be like the world, but it may be unique. So where and how can you answer that? If you want to do a survey, for instance, if you're in Laredo, you don't have a lot of money, imagine you're gonna interview 5 people. How can you ask questions from these 5 people that you could compare people across the US or in Chicago or in other places, or say in France or in China? Could you do that in your, in your case study of one town?
I was thinking I have to be sensitive when it comes to like occupation as well as income, because I don't want to get a sample from like the same demographic as well.
We're assuming, well, no, I wouldn't assume anything. But so that is, you mean in terms of asking the citizens what is their income? I mean, what the solution that people often do is, which of the general categories would you place your what do they even call it here? Which of the following categories does your annual household income fall? So it doesn't say how much did you earn. It might just be high, medium, low, maybe 3, 4, 5 categories. But you don't have to ask actual precise. But in terms of education, those are easier to ask and to answer. What I'm asking is a question for everybody, but I'm using Laredo because here's a concrete case, and I'm saying there's a way you can do this, which is possible for you in his student role with his research budget, which may be 0. How can you do this? Okay, quick answer. I did the same thing when I was a BA student. I was interested in who supported the left or the right, and I took some questions from a well-known book called The Authoritarian Personality, and that had a bunch of surveys, national, international, and so forth. So I took some questions from other questionnaires that other people had already used. They had published the results for US national sample. They may have students at Berkeley, students at UCLA, and we could compare, one other college where I had some students who I could pass out questionnaires in classes. You could give the questionnaire to one person or 4 people in Laredo, but you give them exactly the question which were used in this DDB. And you could then compare Laredo to the rest of the world. You thought about that? Not just archives. Okay? So let's push on, and so one thing that I personally was shocked. I mean, I thought that the people who went to casinos most would be sort of middle and lower income, and we have a simple question. How often in the last year have you been gambling in a casino? See the graph? Higher income people gamble more. It's not something like that. Okay. All right. That's not a proposition. Let's get to something a little more sophisticated, but don't go too far. Number 6, the stronger the commitment to moral asceticism, particularly as it emerged with Calvinist Protestantism, the more that personal consumption and public behavior by the individual and his society are defined or constrained by moral precepts and values. By contrast, secular persons or non-believers should be constrained less by more general values. Their personal consumption and political concerns should be driven more by other factors. Number 7, for some persons, these moral principles are driven by a direct, literal manner by some organized religious norms and institutions, like devout Muslims do not drink alcohol. For Proposition 8, for many other persons, more important than organized religious specifics are the deep value orientations which religion may foster, like egalitarianism, asceticism, thrift, or honesty, which can lead to more specific attitudes like support for political transparency. Okay, so these are examples of the kinds of things which we distilled from Max Weber and other people talking about Calvinism and so forth. We also have boxes. These are little case studies. We have maybe 50 of them here, and in saying that this we spent a lot of time. We have maybe 100 little case studies in here. We got statistics. We got ethnographic discussions of cases of, say, of decisions like the arts clubs in Toronto and how they're important and how they're weak in Chicago by comparison. We then have, it's a way of reviewing the literature, but just if you call it review, people will either skip it or they'll be bored. If instead, pull out a couple of things which is fun and interesting and dramatic or shocking from the literature and feature it and call it a box. And then maybe have a picture with it. And as these days, you now can have not just a picture, you can have a video about it. So you can have, instead of saying there's corruption in Laredo, show us the gas station owner shooting the snake. See these snakes over there? I'm also the police chief. Okay. Use that. Okay. I wish I'd had a video of that one. But use videos, and all of you can make some little shots like that, thinking about how can you do this, not just writing a boring text. I even started a beginning one paper by saying, books are boring, books are dead. What else can we use? And many people around you, maybe fewer at the U of C. But if you go to other universities and colleges, people don't read so many books anymore. Okay, so find some ways of doing 2 or 3. Okay, here's another one. Yeah, this is jumping ahead a bit, but I'll just use it to illustrate the richness of some of the things that we've got here. Page 52. Citizen political cultures are associated with many lifestyle differences, correlations of DDB responses. So here we have 3 types, and we'll read about this later on, but these are the 3 political cultural types of New England, Middle Atlantic, and South. And the first one is called moralism by Daniel Elazar, who really framed this. Individualism, which is the Middle Atlantic Wall Street market, individualistic style. And third, the South is the traditional moralistic set of questions. And so if we look then at how much these have changed. We wanted to match up Elazar's interesting theory with the data we had here. So Elazar didn't do this. What he did was to use archives. He went back through the 20th and 19th century, and he used things to get the especially linguistic maps from linguists, because the way people would talk in one county versus another county could differentiate between Laredo and a different part of Texas. So what we did with this is have items like, I am a homebody, and we code that as part of traditional, not of moralistic or individualistic. I am somewhat old-fashioned. I have somewhat old-fashioned habits and tastes. My opinion on things doesn't count very much. Do you really enjoy your job? And so forth. I mean, these are good items, and we then look and see how much of these things changed over time, from 1975, 1976, every single year through the end of the 20th century. Moralism got stronger in America. On average score, it went from 2.5 up to 4.14. Americans are becoming much more moralistic in the sense of the traditional way when I gave you the first proposition about being ascetic, truthful, honest, and being sensitive. I mean, this has changed in this sense. The individualistic has been about the same. The traditional has gone down from 17 to 13. Okay, so in this sense we got some big changes going on here. Then we also then looked at this with global data, mostly from the World Values Survey, and we looked for measures of the new political culture, which I've talked to you before, and we'll talk about more. But basically, there are items like, generally speaking, can most people be trusted, or can't you be too carefully in dealing with people? So from high to low, it's a measure of trust. This is a please use a scale where it goes from none to 10, where 10 means a great deal, to indicate how much freedom of choice and control you feel you have had over the last year in the way that your life turns out. Okay, then the same questions were asked over time. See, there are only 2 or 3 big international surveys that ask the same items. Newspapers ask, they ask what's hot this week. They don't bother to compare, and then you never know is really a change or not, or whether it's changing internationally. But this permits you then to see how much has there been a change, and the bottom line, if we look at Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Latin America, South Asia, East Asia, Africa, East Central Europe, USA, and the total, how much of these things changed, and most of these, the big pattern is that most of these items have moved substantially in the direction toward moralism and this sort of new political culture, and this New England pattern in ways of egalitarianism has gotten strong, and this has changed in most of these areas with one big exception, which was Africa. Africa generally had no change or a few changes. There was an increase in trust across Africa, and freedom of choice has gone up, but abortion went the other way. And how would you say, how interested, well, no, okay, I won't say anymore. I'm giving you a flavor, but there's a lot of data out there. We didn't collect any of these data. We analyzed ourselves with the DDB data. Most of these, for that one we did run this ourselves. But a lot of things you can summarize someone else's paper, their published paper. I mean, it takes a long time to collect, to get the money, to write the proposal, to get et cetera, et cetera. If you can find a published result, like the percentage of white women who are voting for Trump, you don't need to do the original data analysis, just put it in a box. But if it fits with what you're writing about feminism, that's something you may want to think about as a result. Okay. I'm gonna stop there unless you have a question on anything else there. Okay. How's our time? Anybody? No?
Yeah, it's around 6.
Is
It's
it?
around 6 p.m.
So we're over time right now. Okay, I better stop and stop it. Okay, read on. What I would say would be little excerpts from what's here, and bring any questions next week.